Hello, my name is Jody McCaffree and I live in North Bend, Oregon. And in 2004, we found out that they were proposing a liquefied natural gas. Well, at that time, it was an import terminal here in our Bay Area. And once I did research on that, I got kind of very concerned, and that led to, in 2006, we formed a group called the Citizens Against LNG, and it's just a loose-knit group of citizens that participate in the permitting and regulatory processes. And we've been, quite successful because we had FERC, who is the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. They've actually denied the project several times. So here we are, though. The company can come back again and again, and that's the frustrating thing, is you put your whole life and soul into fighting something and exposing the facts about it, and then you find out, well, they can just fix those facts and come back. So it's been kind of frustrating. I have a PowerPoint presentation that I'd like to present that kind of shows you what it is that is going on here. And this project is directly related at this point to fracking, because if they weren't hydrofracking all this gas from shale beds, we wouldn't have the gas to export. This project is going to be exporting that. So I will do connect you to my PowerPoint presentation, and hopefully this will work. This slide right here is kind of a collage of pictures, and I like to start out with this because it kind of gives you some pictures of what our area contains. We live here on the Pacific coast. There's an ocean in our front yard. You can go surfing, you can go clamming, you can go crabbing, you can go out to Charleston, and there's fishing boats out there. You can go past Charleston. There's Shore Acres and Cape Arago where you can walk on these terrific trails along the beach. You just don't have this everywhere. And the bottom part where the people are riding these dune wheelers, just to the north of the proposed Jordan Cove facility, is the National Dunes Recreation Area. And thousands of people come and visit that area every year to ride the dunes. This next picture is more pictures of our area, just because sometimes I have to go out and just realize what I'm fighting for. And these are pictures of the bay. The one in the top left, if you look, that's taken from the boat ramp on what we call the Norse Fit. If you look in the background there, you will see where they're proposing the facility. I'll show more of that later. The person down below, that picture that's posing with some clams, they're clam digging right at the area where they plan to dredge out for a slip dock that will house these huge LNG tanker ships. And the area to the bottom right that's at Sunset Bay, which is just right here. What is liquefied natural gas? I thought I should cover that because a lot of people don't know. And basically what it is it's natural gas. And in this instance, it would be coming from hydraulic fracturing of shale beds in Canada and in the US. And the hydrofrac gas could contain all kinds of impurities, including cancer-causing radon gas. And those gases are put into pipes and they're shipped on pipelines, and when they would arrive at the facility, it would be in its gaseous state. So at the facility, they would compress and chill it down to minus 260 degrees Fahrenheit, and at that temperature, it liquefies. And at the liquefied volume, it's 1/600th the volume that it is in its gaseous state. So they move a lot of energy this way. They put it in huge tanker ships, and it goes across the ocean, where it's regasified at coastal import terminals overseas and put back into pipelines. And the whole process is very energy intense. It uses a lot of energy. There's a lot of energy wasted. These tanker ships are basically just big thermos bottles. So when the pressure builds up, because this LNG is constantly wanting to go back to atmospheric temperatures, they have to release that excess gas or burn it off. It is dangerous. There's been accidents over the years. In 1944, Cleveland, Ohio had a big accident with a storage facility. 128 people died. In 1973, some workers were cleaning a storage tank that was empty, and it exploded. 37 people died there. And in 2004 in Algeria, 27 people died when there was an explosion at a facility. So, we have some concerns. The tanker ships that would be coming into our area hold an average of 39 million gallons of LNG, and that's far greater than the amount that leveled 1 square mile of Cleveland in 1944. So these are quite a bit bigger boats or ships than what we're used to having. Here's a picture of the port of Coos Bay, the entrance to our channel, looking towards the north at an area we call the Norse Fit. You can see I'll show you right up in there is where the proposed LNG facility is to be, they're proposing it. There's another picture down here that shows a little bit the same area. The channel's quite narrow. It doesn't look that way in these pictures, but if you look at an aerial shot looking straight down, you can see that it isn't that wide. And the yellow push pins here are where the LNG slip dock is proposed, the storage tanks, and the safety center and workforce housing, and the city of North Bend. You can also see the runway, the airport there that's very close. Here's some pictures too of, like, this was taken at a Coos County Board of Commissioner meeting in 2015, and the cargo ship happened to cross, and you can see just how close the buildings are to the shipping channel. And if you look in the bottom lower right, that's just a general cargo ship that comes and visits our area. You can see how narrow it is. You can see the Norse Fit we're standing on Cape Arago Highway, which is just to the west of the city of North Bend, and it's just not a very wide channel. Here's a comparison, this Deo paper ship to an actual LNG ship, and it's actually one of the smaller LNG ships, so you can see the size difference. And Jordan Cove is saying that they will have a maximum of 120 LNG carrier calls per year. And that's actually between 220 and 240 harbor disruptions, because they have to have this bubble of security around these tankers, both coming and going. And because these tankers have a 40-foot draft, they have to, our channel is only 37 feet, so they have to do their transits at high slack tides, which are prime tides for our other Bay Area users. And if you look at this is actually looking at both the security, the 500-yard security zone that they have imposed around the tankers. And the reason they have that is because these tankers have a huge hazardous burn zones. If there was to be an incident, the burn zone goes out to this outer blue limit. The first zone in the yellow there, that you're not going to likely survive at all there. The green is a mile out. People are at risk of receiving second-degree burns in 30 seconds at a mile out, and you're still at risk farther, but it'll take a little bit longer. So there's extreme hazards if there was to be an incident. So there should be some real concerns here. Other ports have not allowed these facilities because of this hazard, but a lot of people here do not have the experience in this kind of a type of industry, so they're not really up on it. The Coast Guard in 2008 had a water suitability report, and they said that that no vessel could enter this 500-yard safety and security zone around the tanker ship without first getting a permission from the Coast Guard, and of course the captain of the Coast Guard. And of course in our instance, because we're rural, that person is in Portland, which is several hundred miles from here. So this could have a real negative impact on our fishing and other bay users that use the Coos Bay. Back in 2003, there was a Congressional Research Service report that showed that the public cost to secure the first LNG tanker ship back to the Everett terminal after 9/11 was around $80,000. And the cities back there, they estimated, Boston and Chelsea, that it was $37,500 out of their public city budgets to safeguard that first vessel. And that's in addition to what the terminal owner provides. So this is an expense on your public services. According to the Jordan Cove DEIS, they stated that 31,560 trips per year occurred from recreational boaters in the Coos Bay, and a lot of that is for fishing. And the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife has stated that in the coastal communities, up to 20% of the total net earnings in our communities come from fisheries. And if you look at that picture, it's not really a good one on the bottom of the screen. There's about 6 boats out there, a lot of recreational boats. And this is looking right where Jordan Cove is being proposed. So there would be an impact to this recreational fishing. Ocean acidification. A lot of people talk about climate change as what could happen, but ocean acidification is already happening, and we've already had, it cost our oyster industry in the Pacific Northwest nearly 110 million, and it's jeopardized about 3,200 jobs. And what happened is in 2006, they noticed that they had 80% die-off of their baby oysters at the Whiskey Creek Shellfish Hatchery in Oregon. And about the same time, they were having the same problem up in Washington at a hatchery they have up there. And they didn't know what happened, what was causing it. And after 2 years, they discovered that it was actually the ocean pH, that the ocean had, the acidic nature of the ocean had actually changed and caused it was so acidic that the baby oysters couldn't build their shells. So they basically were dying because of that. And you know, they were able to solve these problems by getting tanks, and now, like our local oyster companies, they put their baby oysters in these tanks and keep the pH until they're big enough that they can make it in the estuaries. But you got to realize there's lots of clams and oysters and crabs that they don't have a tank to go in to have their baby oysters, you know, be saved from this. In January of 2018, the Oil Change International did a briefing, and they determined that the Jordan Cove LNG project would be Oregon's largest greenhouse gas polluter, equivalent to 15 times the 2016 emissions from Oregon's only remaining coal plant. So this is not a clean fuel. It's not a good. They want to have it as a bridge fuel, but it's actually just, as far as greenhouse gases, we can see it's worse in some cases. And the briefing also found that there was no real evidence to support that the project would replace coal in global markets. That is in with my brief if you want to read this report. I do hope that you will look at the brief I provided, because there's no way I can go over all the stuff that is actually in that brief. I'm going into some other areas. This dredging is directly related to the Jordan Cove project because their tanker ships are so large, they would have to dredge the bay. They are wanting to remove 5.6 million cubic yards of material just to build their slip dock and access channel. They also have about 700,000 cubic yards of material that they would be removing from the navigational channel. In addition to that, though, the Oregon International Port of Coos Bay is also proposing the removal of 18 million cubic yards of material. So that's a direct result of Jordan Cove. And just to give you an example, the 5.7 million cubic yards of dredge material that would be equivalent to 26.8 football fields filled 100 feet high with dredge material. That is an enormous amount of material that would leave our estuary, and it would not do so without having negative impacts. The dredging is a problem because when sediment gets in the water, that we have a pretty swift tidal action here, and oysters are filter feeders, and they cannot take large volumes of dredging sediment in the water, and they will have big die-offs. And our oyster growers have had some problems with this sometimes, you know, for other reasons. When it's really stormy, they have to go lift the oysters up even to get them off the floor. So it's a serious problem. And also dredging, there's some studies that show that it's harmful to the Dungeness crab, which represents a valuable fisheries on the West Coast. So I'd encourage you to look at that stuff in the study, in my briefing. Coos Bay actually is a big travel. People come here to enjoy our beaches and to recreate on the Norse Fit. and see our adventure coast. And in 2016, they spent in Coos County alone $265 million, which is a big part of our economy here. And in fact, the last 4 years, it was over $1 billion that came into our local economy. And it's directly related to 3,280 local jobs here. These jobs will be negatively impacted by this project. There's also an issue with the airport. On May 7th, the FAA released 13 determinations of presumed airport hazard with respect to this proposed project. 9 of those involved the transiting LNG tanker ships. In the bottom right, you can see the airport runways and where these the storage tanks would be. And the facility itself has a problem because it releases, when you liquefy natural gas, there's a lot of heat that is expelled into the air, and this creates another hazard with what they call a thermal plume, because the planes can't see it, and it can actually flip a plane on takeoff, and they're too low to the ground then to be able to recover. So there's some serious issues here with the close proximity of our airport to this proposed project. And here's a picture of the runway, the east-west runway, and how close it is to the navigational channel there in the blue. It's just really not that far for planes coming and taking off. There's other local impacts too. In Kitimat, housing prices and rents have as much as tripled. And also in my brief, this is more detailed in my brief, I show this graph where the oil sands, as the expenditures increase, so did the housing and rent prices. And this is kind of difficult for an area like our area because we have low income here. And I know in places like Sakhalin Island, where they also have a proposed LNG facility, the local people, the prices went so high that local people couldn't afford them. And we know right now we have only a 1% vacancy in our renting, and so that can be a real problem with 2,000 workers coming in that will be building this facility. It's also shown that crime and other health impacts on our healthcare facilities and stuff, it'll all be impacted because that's a big influx of people coming into a rural area. The Jordan Cove project also has a 229-mile, 36-inch pipeline. It's going to operate at 1,600 pounds per square inch. It will be transporting 1.2 billion cubic feet of gas per day, either on the GTN network that comes down from Canada or the Ruby pipeline that goes to the Midwest. Pembina, which is a Canadian company, is 100% owner of the Pacific Connector gas pipeline. Here's about 148 miles, 65% of the proposed pipeline route would cross private property, and this could be taken by eminent domain, and that would be via a Canadian owned and operated company. And a lot of landowners are pretty upset about this. We have people that have ranches and timber people that depend on their timber. This clear cut, it would be a 95-foot clear cut through Oregon. And, you know, people don't feel that a Canadian company should have the right of eminent domain. The Pacific Connector, or the proposed Pacific Connector, would cross 5 rivers. Several of these rivers it crosses more than once. That's the Coos, the Coquille, the Rogue, the South Umpqua, and the Klamath rivers. The pipeline would impact or cross about 342 streams, and many of these are spawning grounds for salmon and steelhead. So you can see the impact to the fisheries is with the pipeline also. About 148 miles of the pipeline is privately owned, and 62 miles of that are held by timber companies. And here's some pictures of some of the trees that would be permanently removed and taken out of production. There'll be a permanent 30-foot clear cut through our forest zones, our forest lands. And the result is about 4,947 acres of disturbance overall. Here's some of our history, and Jordan Cove began in November 2004. FERC vacated the first order that they had done in April of 2012. Jordan Cove reapplied in 2013. We went through the whole process again, which is a federal process, a state process, and there's dozens of local processes. So FERC on March 11th actually denied the applications. And here on September 21st, 2017, Jordan Cove came back again and refiled an application, and we're once again back in the federal energy regulatory process for a draft environmental impact statement, which will be out at some point here for review and comment. Once again, we spend hours and hours and hours commenting and putting stuff into records, and then if we, we have to challenge them if they if the decisions are not made in the best interest of the public. And here's just a list about, this is not even half of the local permits we've had to do. And what happens is we challenge them, we show the flaws, and Jordan Cove goes and fixes the flaws, and they come back, and then we have to go through this whole process again and again and again. And it is just wearing. It's so unfair to people. We've raised money, hired lawyers, but that we're up against millions of dollars. In fact, this year alone, it's $135 million that we will be up against Pembina, that they're going to invest in these processes. Here's what the Norse Fit looks like right now today. And, it's an area where people recreate and they can do lots of things. And this is what, some people want it to look like in the future. And is it the jobs answer? We think that there's a better way to go than this. So that's the end of my presentation. And if you have any questions, I'll be happy to take them.
I can testify that Jody has spent years on this, just spending her energies and resources down to nothing, working on this, just overexhausting herself. So her testimony here is informationally worthwhile and personally personally earned. So.
Jody, Gil Beringer, just one question, and perhaps no one knows the answer, but I was just wondering what percentage of the product of fracking, and let's talk about the LNG. What percentage of that is being used for energy, and what percent is being shipped out for profit? Shipped out overseas? Any idea, or just an estimate?
Well, I briefly, in the brief I filed, there is a page where I talk about, what's lost in the shipping, because really natural gas should be consumed on the continent that it's produced on, and by putting it in a ship and shipping it, you do lose a considerable amount. It's in there from a study that I quote. They say how much is lost, but I don't know overall. But I could get that information for you if, it really depends on how much volume they're exporting. And I'm not an expert in those. We have to find people that are. That's the problem. We're just citizens trying to, fight.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm not sure that I put it clear enough. I was just wondering what percentage of LNG stays in the country for energy, and what is shipped out to get profits, shipped out to other countries.
It's all for export, every last bit of it. They try to say, oh, we're going to take an offshoot of the gas and have it go somewhere, but they're really, when you look at the volumes they're asking the Department of Energy to export, it's actually more than they are applying to FERC to put in the pipeline. And we just last week, that's one reason why I feel like I wished I had had more time to present or work on this, but last week we had a deadline with the Department of Energy. They wanted to increase the volume of gas that they would export. And so it's right at 1 billion cubic feet a day for non-free trade agreement nations, and the Department of Energy has also agreed 1.2 billion cubic feet a day to free trade agreement nations. So basically, you're talking, that's the whole amount of gas that would be in the pipe that they would. So it's 100% for profit for a private company to export.
Yeah. So that's another reason why it's not really a bridging fuel as far as the United States goes. I mean,
Well, there's some people
it's
that
kind of an
think,
irrelevant fuel except for the damage that it's causing.
yes, it's a considerable damage to American. And the reason that this is a Canadian company and they're down here and they're trying to put an LNG terminal here is because they can't get the pipeline through the First Nation territory up there to their coastline in Canada. They have lots of issues up there too, and people don't want these facilities. They consider Oregon a weak link because we do not have the environmental protections at the state level like the state of Washington and California do, and also Canada. Oregon used to be a leader in protecting the environment, but our land use has not been updated. And what we're finding is that's not the case anymore. I mean, we have seen, it's been frustrating to me because I think, well, somebody's looking out for this, somebody's protecting us, and they're not really. I mean, I'm not saying they're not people that try to do that, but the agencies overall, what we see is rubber stamping going on, is particularly at the local level. They just rubber stamp anything, and it's like, who's protecting this? Nothing. I don't know. I thank God that FERC said no. I mean, because they finally looked and saw this project so flawed that they couldn't even accept it as being acceptable. And I pray that that's again, but it's so, why should we have to keep coming back? I have said the same thing to these, and a lot of these permitting processes over and over and over again, all my time. It's 100% takes all my time. I don't know how much more that, I could keep doing this, but it's very frustrating.
Yeah, well, your presentation was impressive, and what you've done is marvelous, but one can understand the frustration and the wearing nature of the impending further disasters that you and your people face. It's interesting because we've been talking about the system. I mean, let's face it, we're talking about capitalist corporations, and they want profits. And as Marx said and Engels in the Communist Manifesto, they chase all over the world to find the resources and the markets and so forth. And I like the use of the phrase weak link, because in a previous PPT, we were looking at the garment industry in Asia. And one of the problems there, of course, for the workers and local people is that the factory owners want to pay the cheapest labor they can. So they look for a weak link. And it became Bangladesh. And we know what happened in Bangladesh at Rana Plaza. More than 3,000 people were killed. So it's definitely a system, and it's not just in one industry, it's in every industry in the system which now dominates the economy of the world. Thanks very much. It was very helpful.
Yes, they're here because, they saw people that would just roll over on the cheap, thinking this was jobs. And it's really even not that many jobs. It's actually only going to be 180 jobs in Coos County. I mean, that's not that many jobs for the huge impacts this facility would have and the negative impacts. We're actually going to lose jobs, I think, overall between our tourism and other industries that we have here, because the impacts, and the people don't know. They're not smart enough to ask the right questions. That's what's so frustrating.
And presumably part of the propaganda, or as they would say, the PR, is that there are going to be more jobs.
Oh, yes. They claim all these secondary jobs.
Izzy Stone, the late lamented Izzy Stone, once said that all governments lie. And I suspect if he were alive today and still writing, he would say all corporations lie, certainly in this industry. And that seems to be suggested by the evidence we've been receiving.
Yes, and what we found here too is what they've done is they've come in here and they bought elections. I mean, they can put out money. We are not that, well off. People can't do that. So they took over our commissions, and then they changed the rules. And it's very frustrating because you're up against so much money, and and then people get elected, and you have no voice then.
Thanks, Jody.
Thank you for having me.
Eloquent.